Strangers by Belle Burden. All the videos I've seen, all the commentary of everyone was focused on the betrayal. How could he do this? How could she not see it? How does someone just leave a 20-year marriage without warning? And I want to flip that question. I understand why it happened, but I think we can learn from this, right? And the question is not, how could he do this to her? It's how did she end up so vulnerable when he did? Hello, and welcome back to the EmpowerHER Podcast. Today, I want to talk about a book, which I never do book reviews, although I definitely could because I read quite often. I'm an avid reader, but I really wanted to talk about this one because it was all over social media. I listened to podcasts with the author. It was really in the zeitgeist, and it just aligns so well with everything that I have frankly been talking about the last several months. And so I thought it would be great to do a review. And the book is Strangers by Belle Burden. We will be talking about spoilers, so if that bothers you and you haven't read it and you want to, although to be honest, there's nothing super, in my opinion, crazy that happened. And I think that's what I want to talk about today is I didn't find the book as insane as everyone else did. I saw on social media collectively people were losing their minds over this story. Women were saying they couldn't put it down. They were shocked by what happened. They were on the edge of their seats, book clubs, TikToks, podcasts, you name it. I read the whole thing and I felt none of that. It was well written. So don't get me wrong, it was well written. It was interesting. I finished it pretty quickly, but I didn't have the same reaction that everyone else did. And not because Belle Burden's pain wasn't real. It was, but nothing surprised me in that book. Not one thing surprised me in that book. And I've been sitting with it, trying to understand why I didn't have that same reaction as everyone else. And I really think that it comes down to, and we'll do an overview of the book. So if you haven't read it in a second, I will talk about, what happened in the book so we have context. But just in general, the book is basically about Belle Burden and the demise of her marriage. And I've always expected, and this is what I tell my friends, my family, literally anyone that will listen, that the person that you marry is not the same person that you divorced. I remember I had a colleague of mine, and he's actually 10 years older than me. And when I joined, this was in corporate. When I joined the company, I was 22, so he was about 32, and we worked together for 7 years there. And I remember I would always say this to him. I would always say the person you marry is not the person you divorce. And he really didn't appreciate me saying that. I think he felt that I was being very negative. And then he ended I think they were together for 3 years, a relationship. And he said to me, we were at a team building, he's like, I just wanted to tell you that you're right. And now I understand why you said that. And the person that you do get in a relationship with is not the same person who you leave the relationship with. And he was like, now I get what you were saying. And it was validating for me. Obviously, I wasn't happy that he had that experience, but it was validating for me that I was right and that this is what I'm seeing and how I feel as well. And at the end of the day, when relationships end, although some of them can end amicably, of course, but there's a lot of scenarios where it doesn't end amicably. And you can never fully predict how someone is going to be in a crisis, and that's why I talk so much on my podcast and on social media and to all my, what I say on my podcast, it is tenfold with my friends. Anyone who will listen, especially my women friends, I am always preaching. I'm like, hey girl, you need to get it together, right? I want you to be financially independent. Are you sure this is the person you want to be with? What about if you ask for this? Blah, blah, blah. I'm always that person. I'm probably annoying, but I don't care. The way I see it is if it's going to help them in a situation, then it matters. But this is why I've spent, so much of my life, honestly, talking about financial independence, prenups, knowing your worth, never outsourcing your security to another person, even if you're in a loving marriage, even if you trust that person. So today I want to talk about the book, what everyone focused on, what I felt the real story was, and really what we can learn from this situation, because I don't want any of you to end up in her situation, right? And she was privileged, right? She had money, she came from money. So this is a privileged situation. Imagine not being privileged and being in this situation. even worse. I never want any of you to be there. So let's first do an overview of the book just for anyone who hasn't read it so we can get an idea. So Belle Burden had what looked like a perfect life. She went to Harvard. She got her law degree from NYU. She married a hedge fund manager. They had 3 children. They lived between New York City and Manhattan and Martha's Vineyard. So they had a house or an apartment in New York City and a house in Martha's Vineyard. And by every external measure, she had it all, right? She had the loving husband, the 2 she adored, loved, her 3 amazing kids. They had money. They were moving up. They had their own properties, like all the things, right? And COVID came, March 2020. And basically at the beginning of the pandemic, her husband announced out of nowhere that he was leaving her. Basically what happened is one day Belle Burden, got a call from a guy who, and I don't remember if it was a call or a text, maybe it was a text, basically saying, hey, my wife and your husband are having an affair. And she confronted her husband. He was like, no, it's over. I love you. And then basically like the next second was like, actually, I'm leaving you for her. And he just left. And there was no warning. She talks in the book extensively about, were there warning signs? Did she have any idea? And from her perspective, like, of course you can, hindsight is 2020. Of course you can look back and say, well, maybe this was a warning sign. But like, she didn't feel anything in those moments. She was happy. She was in love. She really had no indication that her husband was having an affair, that he was unhappy, any of those things. And he simply just decided he was done. He exited their marriage, basically in the same way you would just take off your coat quickly and without looking back. And she details in the book what followed of not just emotional, but financial aspects, legal aspects. Basically what happened is they had a prenup and Belle Burden had a trust fund. She bought the apartment in New York and the house on Martha's Vineyard. And in their prenup, it would have been where everything they earn in the marriage is split 50-50 if they were divorced. However, her husband asked her to change a clause in the marriage, mind you, 3 days before the wedding, change a clause in the prenup to state that anything that was earned independently would, like on their own name, they would keep it and it wouldn't be split 50-50. Meaning, if he earns money, if he buys a property in his name, if they got divorced, he would keep all that. Same with her, which would be fine, except she, and I say made the mistake. I don't want to judge her, but she bought the apartment in New York. She bought the house on Martha's Vineyard, and she put his name on both of the properties, which means that if they were to get divorced, he would be entitled to half of both of those, but she would be entitled to none of his earnings that he got in the marriage at his work because that was just his. Okay, so you see where we're going. So basically when they got divorced, she wasn't really working. She did some pro bono work, but she wasn't working, making her own money. And she trusted him to handle everything financially. And he did. And she didn't realize that actually he made a lot of money in the marriage. He was very, very wealthy. She had no idea. And when they divorced, he used that leverage against her. He basically threatened her financially to take away the house and the apartment or make her sell it so that they could split it 50-50 during the divorce process. And, so spoiler here if you haven't read it, basically what happens at the end is he does end up giving her the apartment in the house. So he doesn't take it, half of it, which is like, you're thinking, oh, that's so nice. Like, fuck that. He should have done that from the beginning. She shouldn't have put his name on it, but that's a whole other conversation. And, one of the most devastating things, during the divorce was when he left, he said he doesn't want custody of the kids. They have 3 children. They were all under 18. He doesn't want custody of the kids. He doesn't want them to sleep over. He didn't get an apartment where they could sleep over. He wanted nothing to do with that. He wanted to hang out with them so-and-so every once in a while, but he wanted nothing to do with that. And I think that's what a lot of people were like, oh my God, about in the book. Again, from personal experience, and again, it's not all men, but a lot of men, they don't have the emotional capacity to deal with these situations and they check out. And that doesn't mean just from their marriage, it means from their kids as well. I've seen it time and time again. So, eventually she rebuilt and she started practicing law again. She wrote this book. She came out on the other side. But, it was very devastating. And to this day, was what she said. I've listened to some podcasts. She doesn't really understand what happened, like why he ended up leaving, what he was unhappy about. She doesn't know. And it's interesting because she said on a podcast, they don't really have a relationship now. They don't really speak or see each other or anything. So, it's an interesting dynamic of how you can go from being with someone for 20 years and then one day to the next, he's like, see ya. And I don't want anything to do with the kids. And I'm going to try to take everything from you financially and all the things I earned in the marriage, which while you were home raising your kids, managing the household, you get none of that I made. So this is the overview of like what the book was about. And I want to talk about why I wasn't shocked. And everyone was focused, all the videos I've seen, all the commentary of like everyone was focused on the betrayal. How could he do this? How could she not see it? How does someone just leave a 20-year marriage without warning? And I want to flip that question. And again, I'm not coming from a place of judgment because, as I've said before, I think women in that generation, and that's my mom's generation, right, in their 50s and their 60s, they were not socialized or taught about money the way us millennials and Gen Z and younger women are. We're finally getting to a place where we're being taught more, even though it's not exactly where it should be, but it is more in a place where we're getting taught to be financially independent. Millennial women are extremely financially independent. We own more homes than men. There's so many things that we're doing that's putting us in a good financial state. But what I say is not coming from a place of judgment because I understand why it happened, but I think we can learn from this, right? And the question is not, how could he do this to her? It's how did she end up so vulnerable when he did? Because it's not about the fact that he did this, right? Because people will do this. They will continue to do this. It's about making sure that if this happens to you, that you are in a financial place where it's not going to affect you so deeply and where you can be safe. And again, a man checking out of a marriage, becoming a financially aggressive during a divorce, prioritizing his own exit, that is not as rare as we want it to be. It's just not. And I'm saying this from personal experience. I've seen it. There are, countless celebrities we've seen this with, housewives, all the things. This is not rare. And that's what emotions and self-preservation do to people. And, I've seen, again, a lot of this happens. And this is why I will never outsource my financial independence to another person. I'm married, which I talk about. I love my husband. I trust him. But we are going to talk about a postnup, about what financials look like if we have kids, because I will not be in this situation. I will not be in this situation. The thing is with Belle's situation is what made it so catastrophic wasn't just that he left. It was the system she had built, or more accurately, we could say the system she allowed to be built around her that left her exposed, right? She had no financial visibility. She didn't know what was going on with their finances, their bank accounts, their credit cards, how much money he made, nothing. She had no independent income, right? She wasn't working, so therefore she didn't have independent income. She had no legal protection, right? And if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're thinking, well, but how can I be a stay-at-home mom? You can get a salary from your husband. You could get a monthly amount. There's many things you could put in your prenup that if he were to leave you, you get divorced, you get a certain amount for being at home every year, right? There's like a million ways we could get this to work for you, right? And she made herself the kind of partner who was completely dependent on a man who, as it turns out, she didn't fully know, or someone that changed, right? He changed. And here's the thing I want to clarify again. It's not her fault. We're not putting blame, and I'd never want to put blame on other women. She was operating inside a system that tells women that being a devoted wife and mother and trusting your husband is the right way to do a marriage. She did everything that she was supposed to do according to everyone, right? And it still left her vulnerable, right? The system is the problem, and that's what we have to change. And I want to bring this to Bravo, some housewives, because I love comparing it. And I'm like a big, big, big Bravo Housewives fan. So I've watched, pretty much every single franchise, every season, like obsessed. And again, this has happened over and over. So I want to give a couple of examples of when this has happened in Bravo, just so we can see it. So Camille and Kelsey Grammer. So Camille Grammer was on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills in season 1 as a housewife. She was Kelsey Grammer's wife, who's a famous actor. And that was essentially her identity on the show. If you go back to that season, you see that that was her identity. And while she was filming, basically, Kelsey was in New York doing a Broadway show and he was cheating on her. Now, we didn't find this out till after, but basically he was cheating on her. He called her on the phone one day to end their 13-year marriage on a phone call, okay? And if you see her on the show, she's like, oh, my husband this, my husband that, like obsessed, right? And he ended their marriage on a call. And Camille ended up financially okay because California is a community property state and she fought hard for it and, it wasn't an issue for her. But just to look at where she started, she defined everything by her marriage. Her identity was built around being a wife. She was blindsided by the phone call. The structure of her life had been built around him. And the reason she came out okay really had nothing to do with the marriage protecting her, because if she would have lived in another state, which doesn't have community property law, then maybe she wouldn't have had the same situation, right? And they had kids, so, that matters in courts and all of that. But, it had to do with the fact that she was in California and she had a good lawyer and she had the means to do it. And she was able to fight for what she deserved. Another example also on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills is Erica Jane and Tom Girardi. So yeah, this one was crazy too. I mean, Erica Jane was married to Tom for 21 years. She presented in a life of extreme wealth on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, the Glam Squad, private planes, diamonds, the whole thing. Like, she really did. She even released a song called It's Expensive to Be Me, which, it's amazing. And the whole time, Tom was allegedly embezzling millions of dollars from his own clients. So this was like a whole court case and a whole thing, including plane crash victims and burn patients. And when it all collapsed and when everything came down, Erica was left holding the bag publicly, and she was sued for millions of dollars because of something that Tom did, which she had no oversight on. But because they were married, they were also suing her, saying she spent the money that he embezzled, all of those things. And, to this day, she maintains that she had no idea what happened, but that was money in their marriage and she didn't know, right? She was living inside financial decisions of her marriage with zero visibility, right? And she was surrounded by so much wealth that she had no real understanding or control over it. And when it came apart, she is still, to this day, even though this happened years ago, entangled in financial lawsuits and situations. And obviously, this is an extreme situation, but this is also possible. Even on a micro level, this is possible, right? If your partner has $5,000 in credit card debt that you had no idea, and then you get divorced and your name's on the credit card and you also have, right? There's so many options of how this can happen in our day to day. And it's not just my partner handles the bills, because it's okay if one person handles it. I handle the bills in our house, but my husband knows what we're paying, who we pay it to. Comes out of a joint account that we have. He sees what those are and why we're paying it. And I literally talk to him about every bill that we have. I just physically do the bill paying. But, she didn't have any idea what was happening with their money. And, usually you don't find out something's happening until something goes wrong. And the last example was Noella Bergener. And she was, I believe, only on one season of Real Housewives of Orange County. Noella, she definitely had a similar situation to Belle, not as long of a marriage. So she was married to James, a personal injury attorney. And right before filming started, she found out that James had a massive tax debt, over $5 million, that he had hidden from her. She wanted to work through it. She said divorce wasn't even on the table, etc. And then while they were filming the show, he handed divorce papers to her, written in Spanish, served from Puerto Rico, okay? He went to Puerto Rico to strategically file papers to avoid California jurisdiction and alimony laws. She had to have her nanny translate the divorce papers that he randomly sent her. He cut off her credit card, stopped paying for their home, and completely disappeared. She found out he was partying in Mykonos, he wouldn't talk to her, it was a whole thing. And she said this in a post at the time, quote, 5 months ago, my husband and partner of 6 years left the house with his toothbrush, leaving behind his life, family, and home. He ended our marriage with service of divorce papers from Puerto Rico. To this date, he has not visited our son and given me an explanation for his departure. It literally gives me goosebumps reading this, right? Similar situation as Belle in terms of like leaving, not looking back, and they have a child together. And, this is Belle Burden's story, just with the Bravo production budget. But no one was shocked when this happened. I wasn't shocked. This happens literally all the time. So what do these women have in common, right? Belle, Camille, Erica, and Noelle, what do they have in common? They all trusted the structure of their marriage to protect them. They were all stay-at-home wives. They all trusted their partner to support them financially. They all operated inside the system where their husbands held most of the financial power and visibility. And when those marriages ended, regardless of the reasons, because they were all different, although, men being shitty, but whatever, they were all in a position where they had to fight to protect themselves from someone who had once been their partner, their confidant, the person that they loved. And this is the pattern. And it's not about whether your husband, partner is a good person or not, right? It's about what happens when a good person becomes scared, angry, selfish, or just decides they're done. People change under pressure. And if your entire security is tied to another person's goodwill, you are one bad day away from being vulnerable. And again, I will say this till I'm blue in the face. The person that you marry is not the same person that you divorce. I believe that. I've seen it. It's something that I see all the time. And again, this is not about being pessimistic about marriage, right? I think a lot of people, I was just having this conversation over the weekend we were at a friend's house. It was a gathering. And I don't remember how it came up, but I made a comment about wanting a postnup. And this guy was like, who has been in a relationship for about a year, he was like, oh, you would get like a postnup? And I explained why. And he was like, oh, I guess it makes sense. But if you love your partner, whatever, I'm like, it has nothing to do with that. It literally has nothing to do with that. I'm like, I'm not going to get, taken advantage of in a situation. If I have kids, I give my body to having children with someone and then maybe stay home or even just take time off because, hello, you need to recover after having a baby. I am not going to not be compensated for that or take time off and then my partner leaves me and I'm in a bad financial spot because I haven't worked in, 10 months or whatever it is. We're not doing that. So it's interesting to see people's perspectives on it. And, I wanted to end this conversation because I feel like maybe it's like fear mongering, but I wanted to end this conversation with practical tips of what you can actually do to make sure this doesn't happen to you. So again, it's not to scare you. It's not to make you distrust your partner, but it's to make sure that if anything ever changes, you are protected. So let's go through these. I have a few points that I think are really helpful, 5 specifically. So number 1 is have your own income always. So even if you're a stay-at-home mom, even if it feels unnecessary, even if your husband makes way more money than you, your own income is your own power, right? If you're not working, if you decide to stay home, not work, have a direct conversation about household salary, an amount that goes into an account in your name, right? For the work you contribute to the family. This is not crazy. And it's like, oh my God, my husband pays me a salary. Yeah, he pays you a salary because you being at home, you're still working. You're just working inside the home. And I think there was like a statistic that said if we calculate everything a woman does in the house when she has kids or whatever, it adds up to like $250,000 a year worth of work. Like you deserve to be paid, right? So you could do a salary. You could have a prenup or a postnup that says however many years you stayed or however many months you stayed home, you get a certain lump sum or you get a certain amount of years of alimony after that. You could also do a situation where, when you are planning to have a baby, for those months when you're still working before, you don't pay for anything, your husband does, your partner, and then you save that money so that you have it after you've had a baby or you have it there for you if you need it, right? Like there's a lot of ways to go about this depending on what your financial situation is, but these are conversations that you need to have. And this is not crazy. I know we think about marriage as being love and all of that, and it absolutely can be. You should, I would recommend you love the person, right? Like that's important, but it's also a marriage is a business arrangement. It's a business arrangement. It's a financial contract. And the business arrangement needs to be fair for all parties. And we know that historically, for women, it tends to not be fair. So we really need to make sure that it is. The second thing is know your finances completely. So I don't care if you're not the person that physically pays the bills. You should know every account you have. You should know every asset. You should know every debt you have. You should know every password to log in. Your name should be on things if you want them to. You should never be in a position where your nanny has to translate your divorce papers because you had no idea what was happening with your own money. Okay. You need to know where everything is. You need to know on a weekly basis what's happening in your accounts, how much money you're spending, how much money is coming in. You need to know all of that. This is not about distrust. This is about financial literacy. You do not want to be in a position where you and your partner split up and there's debts that you didn't know about, that he made a bunch of money and you won't get any of it, that, you're not paying your bills when he said he was. Like, you do not want to be in a situation. So knowing your finances completely is extremely important. The third thing is, if you are thinking about or you are married, talk about a prenup and or a postnup. So I did an entire episode on this, and I really truly believe that a prenup is not a plan for divorce, okay? It is a forced, honest conversation about money before emotions get involved. And if the idea of a prenup makes your partner uncomfortable, that is information and data that you really need to think long and hard about, right? And if you're married, a postnup, same thing, have the conversation. We, for different legal reasons, decided not to get a prenup with my husband, but we are talking about a postnup and what that would look like. And then that's something that I do want if we are going to have kids. And we are talking about that. And I remember, even though he was maybe taken a little aback by the conversation, just because it's not something that his family ever talked about. His parents are still married. Like, there was never any situation in his life where that would be an option, unlike mine. He was like surprised by the conversation, but he never said no or I don't want to do that. He asked me questions, asked me why. We talked about it. Now he's totally on board and understands why I would want that. But if your partner is like super against it and is uncomfortable with it, that's also a sign for you and potentially something that could be a red flag that you really want to think about. Number 4 is never let your skills go dormant. So Belle had a Harvard law degree. She barely used it. And, she did do some pro bono work, but I do think even if you're not working, like, you just want to make sure that you keep it up, because you don't want to get in a place where you're married for 20 years and then you have to go out into the workforce because that's the only way that you can be financially secure. And you feel like you don't have the skills anymore. What you learned 20 years ago in college isn't relevant anymore. Whether it's taking courses or doing some pro bono work often or volunteering or doing freelance work every once in a while, like just keeping your network up, keeping your career going. You basically want your earning potential to continue to have an upward trajectory, regardless of whether you plan to work or not, because you never know. And those things belong to you and your brain and what you put in your brain and your smarts. Those are things that no one can take away from you. And so just always keeping up on those things is really, really important. And women who walk out the door with their skills intact are never fully powerless, because you can always put yourself back into a good situation. And the fifth thing is know your state's laws or your country's laws, depending on where you live. So you need to understand, if you don't have a prenup and a postnup, what that looks like if you were to get divorced in your state. So California is a community property state. They have often very different protections than non-community property states. So you need to know what you're entitled to. You need to know what that looks like for you. You need to know what a divorce would be in your jurisdiction. Again, not because you want to plan for one, but because knowledge is power and ignorance is not bliss. It's being unprepared. So understand what your laws are. I would even say this is probably number 1, and then you can talk about prenup, postnup, and what that would look like for you. Because again, if you don't make the decision for yourself to have a prenup and a postnup, the state will do it for you. And depending on whether you have kids, don't have kids, all of those things factor in. The judge can factor in, the laws of the state can factor in. So you really want to make sure that you understand what's happening and really what your rights are and what that's going to look like. So, the moral of this story is that Belle came out on the other side, right? She can practice law. She wrote a New York Times bestselling book. Like, she's going to be fine, right? Like, she is a privileged white woman. She's going to be okay. And again, this doesn't take away from her pain. I absolutely don't want to say that, but she will be okay. She rebuilt her life, right? Not everyone is that lucky. And she did it with grace. And honestly, I respect her. Like, I think it's great she wrote the book. It was very detailed. There was lots of things in there. Like, I don't know if I could share those things, but like, go her. Like, I think that it's great, right? And, she had to do it the hard way. It was brutal. And she had to grieve the person she lost while also like fighting them in court, while also, trying to rebuild her life. And I want to encourage you all to say you don't have to do that the hard way, right? If it does happen to you, you don't have to do it the hard way. You can still love your partner and still protect yourself. You can have a beautiful, trusting marriage and still know your finances in and out. You can believe in forever and still have a plan. And that's not cynicism, right? It's just, that's the most loving thing you can do for yourself, for your children, and honestly for your marriage. And because the woman who's financially secure and clear-eyed inside her marriage won't stay out of fear and desperation. She stays because she chooses to stay, because she loves her husband, not because she feels like, her partner, not because she feels like she has to. And that's the kind of love I want for all of you. Okay? That's really what the moral of the story is. And, just start thinking about your finances. Think about how your partnerships look. Think about what you want your life to look like and protect yourself and make those plans so that regardless of what happens, you'll be in a good position. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if it did resonate with you, please share it with a woman in your circle that you love and appreciate, because I think it could be helpful. And I really just want to spread the word. And if you haven't read The Strangers yet, or Strangers by Bill Burton, definitely read it. It's very interesting. You may not be as shocked after listening to this, but I still think it's a really interesting and really good read. Alrighty. Hope you all have an amazing, amazing week, and I'll see you in the next episode.